The moment I found my father's hidden journal, I discovered a family history soaked in secrets. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon when I decided to clear out my father's study. He had recently retired, and the room was filled with years' worth of clutter, old books, papers, and random memorabilia from his career as a history teacher. I had offered to help him organize the space, and while I was dreading the task, a part of me was also curious about what I might find. As I sifted through stacks of papers, I noticed a small leather-bound journal tucked away on a high shelf. It looked out of place among the academic books and work-related documents. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was something personal, but my curiosity got the better of me. I pulled it down and dusted it off. The journal was worn, the edges of the pages frayed. As I flipped it open, I was met with my father's familiar handwriting. The entries were dated back to the late 1990s, when I was just a child. At first, the entries seemed innocuous, musings about daily life, thoughts on teaching, and anecdotes about family gatherings. But as I continued reading, the tone changed. One entry caught my eye, dated just a few days before my parents' anniversary. "I've kept the truth buried for too long. It's time I confront the past." My heart raced. What truth? My father had always seemed so steady, so unwavering. As I read on, I discovered snippets of a life I had never known. He wrote about a family member who had been ostracized, a dark chapter in our family history that had never been mentioned. He referred to the scandal and the shame of a cousin named Lucas, who had been disowned for reasons that were still unclear. The language was laden with regret and sorrow. What is this? I whispered to myself, my pulse quickening. I felt a knot in my stomach as I continued reading, unraveling layers of hidden pain and resentment. My father wrote about how Lucas had been an integral part of the family until his sexual orientation became known. It seemed Lucas had fallen in love with a man at a time when such a revelation could tear families apart. The next entry was even more heart-wrenching. Lucas reached out last week. He wants to reconnect, but I'm torn. How can I face him after everything? My hands trembled as I realized this was about more than just a cousin. It was about my father's struggle with his own beliefs, the clash between family loyalty and societal norms. Feeling overwhelmed, I set the journal down and took a deep breath. How could my father have kept this hidden? I had always thought of him as open-minded, someone who valued family above all else. Yet here was evidence of a deep-rooted conflict within him, a conflict I had never suspected. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself oscillating between anger and sadness. The thought of my father struggling with this secret felt like a betrayal, but I also felt a swell of empathy. He had grown up in a different time, where acceptance was a privilege, not a right. I knew I had to confront him, to ask about what I had uncovered. But how do you approach someone about their hidden past, especially when that past involves shame and regret? That evening, after dinner, I gathered my courage. My father was in the living room, watching TV, and I felt a lump in my throat as I sat down beside him. "Dad, can we talk?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Sure, what's on your mind?" he replied, glancing at me with a hint of concern. "I found something in your study today, your journal. I've read some of it." His expression shifted, the warmth in his eyes replaced by a shadow of worry. "You shouldn't have gone through that, Emily. It's private." "I know, but..." I had to understand. "You wrote about Lucas. Why didn't you ever tell me about him?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Emily, it's complicated. I didn't want to bring that pain into our lives. Lucas was a part of our family, but after he was disowned, everything changed. I felt helpless, like I couldn't do anything to help him. But you were family. Why didn't you reach out to him?" I pressed, trying to understand the depth of his choices. "Because I was scared," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Scared of what people would think, scared of how it would affect you. Back then, it was different. I didn't know how to reconcile my love for him with the beliefs of our family." As he spoke, I could see the pain etched on his face, the weight of years spent hiding his true feelings. "I've spent so long trying to protect you, to keep our family intact. I thought if I ignored it, it would go away. Dad, you don't have to hide from me. I'm here for you." "I want to understand," I said, my heart aching for the man sitting beside me. He took a deep breath, his eyes welling with tears. "I wish I could change things. I wish I could have stood by Lucas when he needed me. But I was young, and I didn't have the courage then. I regret it every day." In that moment, I realized that my father was not just a figure of authority in my life. He was a man who had grappled with his own demons, a man who had been raised in a world that shunned those who dared to love differently. My heart softened, and I reached out to hold his hand. Let's make it right, I suggested. We can reach out to him together. He deserves to know he's not alone. My father nodded slowly, a mix of fear and hope flickering in his eyes. I've thought about it, but I didn't know if he'd even want to see me after all these years. Then let's find out. We can write him a letter, explain everything. He deserves that chance, I urged, feeling a newfound determination. Over the next few weeks, we began drafting a letter together. We poured our hearts into it, acknowledging the pain of the past and expressing our desire to reconnect. It was a difficult process, each word felt like a weight we had to lift off our chests, but I could see my father's spirit begin to lighten as we worked through the emotional turmoil together. Finally, we sent the letter, unsure of what response we might receive. Days turned into weeks, and just as I was beginning to lose hope, a letter arrived addressed to my father. His hands shook as he opened it, and I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "Dear Uncle John," it began, and as he read through the words, tears streamed down his face. Lucas had written about his life, his struggles, and ultimately, his forgiveness. He expressed a desire to reconnect, to heal the wounds that had lingered for far too long. We decided to meet Lucas for coffee, a choice that filled my father with equal parts excitement and anxiety. The day of the meeting arrived, and we found ourselves sitting in a small cafe, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. When Lucas walked in, I hardly recognized him. He had aged, of course, but the warmth in his eyes was still familiar. As they locked eyes, I could see the mix of emotions, years of hurt and love colliding in an instant. They embraced tightly, and I felt a tear slip down my cheek. As they settled into conversation, I watched the walls my father had built around himself begin to crumble. They shared stories, laughter, and eventually, tears. The pain of the past was palpable, but in that moment, it felt like a bridge was being rebuilt between them. Afterward, Lucas turned to me, his smile genuine. "Thank you for encouraging him to reach out. It means the world to me." "I just want us all to be a family," I replied, my heart swelling with hope. Over the next few months, our family dynamics began to shift. Lucas became a part of our lives again, and I watched as my father blossomed, shedding the weight of guilt he had carried for years. They spoke often, sharing memories and healing old wounds, and I felt a new bond form between us. In the process, I learned that family is not just about blood, it's about love, acceptance, and the courage to face our past. My father's journey toward reconciliation inspired me to embrace my own vulnerabilities and confront my fears. As I look back on that rainy day in the attic, I realized that uncovering the truth about my father's hidden journal was not just about secrets, it was about healing and connection. It opened the door for conversations that had been long overdue, allowing us to reclaim lost relationships and redefine what it meant to be a family. Our journey was not without its challenges, but each step brought us closer together. I learned that while the past can be painful, it is also a teacher. And as we continue to navigate our family's story, I carry with me the understanding that love has the power to heal even the deepest scars. The day I found the hidden letters was the day my family's past unraveled. Growing up, I always thought my family was normal. My parents were loving, my siblings and I had our squabbles, but nothing out of the ordinary. It wasn't until I returned home for the holidays that I stumbled upon a truth that would shake my understanding of my family to its core. It was the winter of my junior year in college. My classes had wrapped up, and I was excited to spend time with my family in our cozy house, adorned with twinkling lights and the scent of pine. After a long drive, I arrived to find my parents busy in the kitchen, preparing a feast. My dad was humming holiday tunes, and my mom was bustling around, checking on the turkey. After a few days of holiday festivities, I decided to help my mom clean out the attic. She had been talking about organizing it for ages, and I figured it would be a good way to bond. As we sorted through old boxes of decorations and childhood toys, I felt nostalgic. But soon, I found something unexpected. In a dusty corner of the attic, I noticed a small, locked box. Its wood was old and weathered, and it felt oddly out of place among the decorations. Curiosity piqued, I asked my mom about it. "What's in that box?" I wondered aloud. "Oh, just some old things," she replied dismissively. I could see her eyes dart away, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Fear, perhaps. I couldn't let it go. After some convincing, she reluctantly handed me the key she found tucked away in a drawer. The moment I opened the box, I felt a chill run down my spine. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all neatly stacked and tied with a faded ribbon. "Mom, these look old. What are they?" I asked, intrigued. She hesitated. "Just old correspondence from family. Nothing important." But I knew better. There was something significant about these letters. The handwriting was elegant, and as I flipped through them, I recognized names I had never heard before: Amelia, Richard, and Clara. They seemed to be from the early 1900s, filled with longing and emotion. "Can I read one?" I asked, my heart racing. "No, it's really not a good idea," she replied, her voice suddenly sharp. I felt a wave of disappointment, but also a strange determination. I had to know what was in those letters. That night, while everyone was asleep, I tiptoed back up to the attic. I grabbed the box, taking it to my room where I could read in peace. I carefully untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. It was addressed to a "Dear Clara," and immediately, the words pulled me into a world that felt both distant and intimate. The letter spoke of love and loss, detailing a forbidden romance between Clara and a man named Richard. Their exchanges were filled with passion, yet tinged with despair. It seemed they were separated by family expectations, societal pressures, things I recognized from my own life, albeit in a different context. As I continued reading, I discovered a recurring theme of family secrets. There were references to a scandal, something that had led to Clara being disowned. The deeper I delved into the letters, the more questions flooded my mind. Who were these people? What had happened to them? And why had my mother hidden this part of our family's history? The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Over breakfast, I decided to bring it up. "Mom, can you tell me about the letters in the attic?" She paused, her fork hovering midair. "I told you, they're just old letters. There's nothing to discuss. But they talk about family secrets, about Clara being disowned. It's more than just old correspondence." "Who is she?" My mom sighed, her eyes clouded with emotion. "Clara was complicated. She was my grandmother's sister. But that was a long time ago. We don't talk about her for a reason." "Why not?" I pressed, feeling a mix of frustration and curiosity. "Because it brings up a lot of pain." "Just let it go," she said sharply, her tone leaving no room for further questions. I felt deflated but couldn't let it drop. That night, I returned to the attic. I needed to know more. As I read through the letters again, I noticed one addressed to my grandmother, written in Clara's shaky handwriting. It was dated just a few weeks before Clara disappeared from family history. "Dear Margaret," it began. "I am so sorry for the heartache I've caused. I love Richard more than life itself, but our families will never accept us. I must leave. If you ever loved me, please remember me as I was, not as the family secret I have become." My heart raced. Clara had left, abandoning everything for a love that society deemed unacceptable. But why had my family chosen to bury this part of our history? The following days were a blur of holiday preparations and family gatherings. But every time I saw my mother, I noticed a tension in her posture. The more I learned about Clara, the more I realized how deep the family's denial ran. I couldn't just sit by while this part of our history faded into obscurity. On New Year's Eve, while my family celebrated with laughter and cheers, I made my move. I gathered everyone in the living room and took a deep breath. I found something in the attic. Letters from Clara, Mom's grandmother's sister. They reveal a lot about our family's past. Silence fell over the room, and I could feel the tension crackling in the air. "What do you mean?" my dad asked, his brows furrowed. "They're about her relationship with a man named Richard. She was disowned because of it. It's not just family gossip, it's a part of our history we've ignored." My mother shot me a warning glance, but I pressed on. "We can't just erase her story. We need to acknowledge it." "I don't want to talk about this," my mom said, her voice strained. "But it's important." I replied, feeling my heart pound. "This isn't just about Clara, it's about understanding who we are as a family. We can't just pretend these things don't exist." The room fell silent again, the weight of my words hanging heavily. Finally, my father spoke. "Alice, it's time to share the truth. It's not healthy to keep it buried." My mom's eyes brimmed with tears. "You don't understand. I thought I was protecting you all. Clara's story is filled with heartache, and I didn't want that to taint our lives. But it's a part of us." I insisted. "Ignoring it doesn't make it go away. We can learn from it." As the minutes passed, the tension slowly eased. My family began sharing their own feelings, their own fears about the past. My sister admitted she had always sensed there were secrets but had been too afraid to ask. My dad encouraged my mom to open up, to let us in. Finally, my mother took a deep breath, her voice quaking. "Okay. You deserve to know the truth." She glanced around the room, meeting each of our eyes. "Clara was my favorite aunt. When she fell in love with Richard, it caused a rift in our family. My grandparents disowned her. It was a shameful secret we carried. I thought by burying it, I could protect you from the pain. Clara deserved to be remembered, I said softly. She was brave for following her heart. We should honor her memory. Tears streamed down my mother's face as she nodded, finally allowing herself to confront the past she had been avoiding for so long. You're right. It's time to stop pretending. I'll share her story, and maybe we can find a way to heal together. From that night on, our family dynamics shifted. We began to openly discuss our history, and my mother started sharing stories about Clara, her strength, her love for Richard, and the heartbreak that had led to her disappearance from family narratives. The more we talked, the more we understood. We learned that Clara had eventually moved to another town, living quietly away from the judgment of her family. It was a bittersweet revelation, a reminder of the complexities of love and the pain that often accompanies it. We started a family project to compile Clara's letters into a small book, including the stories we uncovered. We dedicated it to her, hoping to preserve her memory for future generations. The holiday season that year transformed from a time of superficial joy to a profound exploration of our family's legacy. We honored Clara not just as a secret, but as a woman who had fought for love in a world that sought to silence her. In the years that followed, we continued to share Clara's story during family gatherings. It became a way for us to connect, to recognize the struggles and triumphs that shaped our family. We even made an annual tradition of visiting Clara's grave, bringing flowers and sharing her story with each other. I realized that uncovering family secrets can be painful, but it can also lead to healing and understanding. Through Clara's story, we learned to embrace vulnerability and openness, creating a bond that strengthened us. In the end, I learned that our family's history, both light and dark, shapes who we are. By acknowledging our past, we could move forward with a deeper sense of identity and love. And as I looked around at my family, I felt. The moment I found the old diary, I realized my mother had been living a lie. It was an ordinary Saturday when I decided to visit my parents' house to help them declutter. My mom had been talking about wanting to clean out the attic for weeks, and as the family member closest to her, I figured I'd lend a hand. I had no idea that this seemingly mundane task would unravel a secret that had been buried for decades. The attic was a chaotic labyrinth of boxes, old furniture, and forgotten memories. As we pulled out dusty relics from my childhood, I noticed my mom's demeanor shift. She seemed anxious, almost tense, as she sorted through the clutter. It made me curious, what was hidden among the cobwebs that made her so uneasy? After a few hours of digging through old toys and clothes, I stumbled upon a small, worn-out diary tucked away in the corner of a box labeled Important Papers. It was unassuming, with a faded blue cover and frayed edges. Something about it felt significant, so I decided to take a peek. As I opened the diary, I was immediately struck by the handwriting. It was unmistakably my mother's. I scanned the first page, and what I read made my heart race. It was dated back to the late 1980s, when she was in her early 20s. She had written about her life, her hopes, and her dreams. But soon, the tone shifted. The entries became more emotional, revealing a depth of feeling I had never associated with her. The deeper I read, the more unsettled I became. She detailed a tumultuous relationship with a man named Jason, someone I had never heard of. She wrote passionately about love and longing, but the words soon turned dark. The entries spoke of betrayal, heartbreak, and a secret that she felt she could never share. My pulse quickened as I turned to a particularly revealing entry. I don't know how to move on. I have to choose between love and my family's expectations. They'll never accept him. My heart sank. Who was this man that had caused her so much pain, and why had she never mentioned him to me? As I continued to read, I discovered a shocking revelation. I'm pregnant, and I don't know what to do. My parents will disown me if they find out. The words sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't believe what I was reading. My mother, the woman I knew as stable and loving, had experienced such turmoil. Suddenly, the attic felt suffocating. I glanced back at my mom, who was still busy sorting through the boxes, blissfully unaware of what I had uncovered. I closed the diary and placed it back in the box, my mind racing with questions. What had happened to the baby? Did she ever tell my father? I needed answers. Mom, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. Can we talk for a minute? She turned, her brow furrowed with concern. What's wrong? I took a deep breath. I found something in the attic, your diary. I watched as her face paled, the color draining from her cheeks. Emily, why didn't you tell me about Jason? About being pregnant? I interrupted, my heart pounding. Her eyes widened, and I could see the panic rising within her. I never wanted you to know about that part of my life, she said, her voice trembling. It's in the past. I thought it was best to forget. But it's part of who you are. I insisted. You can't just erase it. I need to understand why you kept it from me. She hesitated, her eyes glistening with tears. Because I was ashamed. Jason was someone I loved deeply, but my family wouldn't accept him. When I found out I was pregnant, I knew I had to make a choice, one I've lived with ever since. What happened to the baby? I whispered, my heart breaking for her. My mother swallowed hard, looking away. I lost the baby. I had to go through it alone, and it nearly broke me. I didn't want you to carry that pain, too. Her confession hit me like a brick wall. I felt a mix of sympathy and anger. But you could have told me. I could have helped you. You didn't have to hide it. I didn't want to burden you with my mistakes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought if I buried it, it would disappear. But it didn't work that way. We sat in silence, the air heavy with unspoken words. I could see the weight of her past etched on her face, and I felt a pang of guilt for prying into a life she had tried to leave behind. But the discovery of the diary had shaken my understanding of who she was, and I couldn't just let it go. Mom, I'm not judging you, I said gently. I just want to understand. You're not alone in this. We're family. We should share our burdens. She took a deep breath, her composure returning slightly. You're right. I should have trusted you with my past. I just didn't want to relive it. I can't change what happened, but I want to support you, I said, feeling my own emotions rise to the surface. You've always been there for me. It's time for me to be there for you. After a long pause, she finally spoke. I was afraid that if you knew about Jason, you'd see me differently. I was young and foolish, and I made mistakes. But I thought I could start fresh with your father, and I didn't want to tarnish that. I don't see you differently, I reassured her. You're still the same mom I've always loved. But now I see how complex your life has been. Her eyes brimmed with tears, and she took my hand. Thank you for understanding, Emily. It means more to me than you know. From that moment on, our relationship shifted. We began to have more open conversations about the past, each revealing layer adding depth to our bond. She shared stories of her youth, her dreams, and the heartaches that had shaped her. The more we talked, the more I understood the woman behind the mother. Weeks passed, and we continued to explore her past together. She even agreed to let me help her write her story, a way to document her life and make peace with her history. We set aside time each week to talk, to write, and to remember. During our sessions, I learned that her relationship with Jason had lasted longer than I had realized. They had dreams of traveling the world together, but when her pregnancy complications arose, everything spiraled out of control. She had felt isolated, abandoned by the very people who were supposed to support her. The decision to move on and marry my father was not taken lightly, it was a way to heal, to start anew. One afternoon, as we sat surrounded by notebooks filled with her stories, she paused and looked at me, her expression thoughtful. I've never really shared these things with anyone, she admitted. It's freeing, but it's also terrifying. Why? I asked, intrigued. Because it means facing the pain I've buried for so long, she replied. But I see now that it's important to acknowledge it. It's part of who I am, and I want you to know the truth. We discussed the possibility of sharing her story with the rest of the family. I suggested that she could write a letter to my father, explaining everything in her own words. The thought made her nervous, but I encouraged her to embrace the vulnerability. Finally, after much deliberation, she agreed. With my help, she penned a heartfelt letter, detailing her past and her love for Jason, along with her subsequent journey toward healing. I could see the weight lifting off her shoulders as she wrote, her emotions flowing freely onto the page. The day she chose to share the letter with my father, I sat nearby, my heart racing. I could feel the tension in the air as she handed it to him, her hands trembling. He looked at her with a mix of confusion and concern, and as he began to read, I held my breath. When he finished, there was a long silence. My mother's eyes were filled with apprehension, and I could sense the anxiety radiating from her. Finally, my father looked up, his expression softening. I had no idea, Alice, he said gently. Thank you for sharing this with me. It can't have been easy. Tears streamed down my mother's cheeks as he reached for her hand. You don't need to hide anything from me. We're in this together, always. Their exchange melted my heart. In that moment, I realized how powerful it was to confront the past and to allow love and understanding to prevail. The secrets that once felt like burdens were becoming bridges toward deeper connections. In the following months, we continued to explore my mother's story, and she gradually found the courage to share her experiences with other family members. I watched as they listened, absorbing her words with compassion and understanding. The impact of her honesty rippled through our family. Many relatives shared their own hidden struggles, and it opened up a space for vulnerability that had been missing. As we gathered for holidays, we created new traditions that honored our family history. We shared stories about Maria, my mother's twin sister, and celebrated her life along with the lessons learned from her memory. I could see my mother begin to heal. No longer burdened by the weight of her secrets, she radiated a sense of peace. It was as if she had reclaimed a part of herself that had been lost for years. Looking back, I realized that uncovering the truth about my mother's past wasn't just about the secrets, it was about understanding, healing, and the power of love. It had transformed our family, allowing us to embrace our shared history and build a stronger bond. As I sat with my family, sharing laughter and stories, I couldn't help but feel grateful. The journey we had embarked upon together had brought us closer than I ever thought possible. And while the past was painful, it was also a testament to resilience and the enduring strength of family. In the end, I learned that every family has its secrets. But with love, patience, and honesty, those secrets can become threads that weave a more beautiful tapestry, connecting us in ways we never imagined. The discovery of a hidden photo revealed my family's truth: we weren't who we thought we were. As I rummaged through my grandmother's attic on a dreary Saturday afternoon, I stumbled upon a dusty, old trunk that had been carelessly shoved in a corner. The trunk was faded and worn, its lock rusted shut. I couldn't resist the urge to pry it open, wondering what forgotten treasures lay inside. What I found, however, shattered the illusion of my family's history. It was a chilly October day, the kind that made the air feel thick with anticipation. My grandmother had moved to a retirement home after my grandfather passed away, and I was tasked with clearing out her belongings. The task felt like an invasion of her privacy, yet I was also curious about her life before she became the matriarch I knew. I had heard snippets of stories about my grandparents' past, how they met during the war, the struggles they faced raising 4 children, and the love that had seemingly weathered the test of time. But as I opened the trunk, the facade of my family's history began to crack. Inside the trunk, nestled between yellowed newspapers and moth-eaten blankets, I found a bundle of photographs. Most were familiar faces: my parents, my aunts and uncles, and of course, my grandparents. But then I came across one photo that made my heart drop, a black and white picture of a woman who was not my grandmother, standing alongside a man I had never seen before. I picked it up, examining the faces. The woman had striking features that mirrored my grandmother's, the same high cheekbones, the same piercing blue eyes. But she was younger, perhaps in her 20s, and looked so full of life. The man beside her wore a military uniform and had an arm draped casually over her shoulder, their expressions suggesting a bond deeper than friendship. Confusion swept over me. Who were they? My instincts told me this was important, yet I felt a sense of dread creeping in. I flipped the photo over, my hands trembling. In faded ink, it simply read, "With all my love, Maria." Maria? I murmured to myself. I had never heard that name before in connection to my family. What did this mean? I felt a wave of nausea as I continued to sift through the contents of the trunk. There were letters, more photographs, and even a small diary. The letters were addressed to "My dearest Maria" and were filled with longing and passion. The handwriting was elegant, flowing like a river of emotion. I felt like an intruder in a secret world, and yet, I couldn't stop myself from reading. One letter stood out, dated just a few months before World War II ended. It spoke of dreams and plans, of a future together that seemed so hopeful. But it was the last line that caught my breath: "If you never hear from me again, know that I loved you until my last breath." My heart raced. This was a different side of my grandmother, one that had been hidden away for decades. I thought about the stories she had told me about her life and how they had always been painted in warm, nostalgic colors. But here, the truth was layered in grief and unfulfilled love. Feeling overwhelmed, I carefully packed everything back into the trunk and took a deep breath. I needed to confront my grandmother, to understand the significance of what I had found. But how could I do that without making her feel like I had invaded her past? Later that evening, as I sat across from her in the cozy living room of her retirement home, I felt the weight of the secrets I was about to unveil. She looked frail but still carried the same fierce spirit I admired. The room was filled with photos of family gatherings, birthday parties, and vacations, all adorned with laughter and love. "Grandma," I began hesitantly, "I found something in the attic today." Something about your past. Her expression shifted from curious to cautious. What did you find, dear? A trunk filled with photos and letters, I said carefully, watching her closely. There was a photo of a woman named Maria. Her face went pale. Oh. The word was barely a whisper, but it was heavy with unspoken truths. Who is she? I pressed, unable to mask my urgency. Was she a part of your life before you met Grandpa? A long silence hung between us, thick with tension. Finally, she looked down at her hands, her fingers trembling. Maria was my sister. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Sister. I never knew you had a sister. She was my twin, my grandmother continued, her voice barely above a whisper. We were inseparable growing up. But the war changed everything. My mind raced as I tried to piece together the fragments of my grandmother's life that I thought I understood. What happened to her? My grandmother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Maria was in love with a soldier, just like in those letters. They had plans to marry after the war, but, she paused, her breath hitching. He never came back. She was heartbroken. She never fully recovered. The pain in her voice cut deep, and I felt the weight of history pressing down on us. I'm so sorry, Grandma, I said softly. I had no idea. Most people don't, she replied, her voice steadying. I buried it. It hurt too much to talk about. After Maria died in an accident shortly after the war, I felt I had to move on. I didn't want to keep those memories alive, I wanted to build a life with your grandfather. Accident? I asked, my heart pounding. Yes, she said, wiping a tear from her cheek. She had gone to visit a friend when a car hit her. I was devastated. I thought I lost my other half. The revelation shook me to my core. I could feel the pieces of my family's history falling into place, but the picture was far more complicated than I had ever imagined. Why didn't you ever tell anyone? Why did you keep it a secret? Because I thought it was for the best, she said, her voice trembling. Your grandfather knew about her, but I didn't want the pain to overshadow our lives. I wanted to focus on building a family, a legacy. I understand wanting to protect your memories, I said gently, but it feels like you've carried this burden alone for so long. I have, she admitted, looking old and weary. But sharing this with you feels freeing. It's as if I've been carrying a weight all these years, and finally, someone else knows. We sat in silence, the atmosphere heavy with the shared understanding of grief and love. I could see the vulnerability in her eyes, a woman who had built a life while burying her deepest sorrow. I reached across the table, holding her hand tightly. Thank you for sharing this with me, I said, my voice sincere. Maria was part of you, and now she's part of our family's story. We can honor her memory together. My grandmother smiled through her tears, and I felt a warmth spreading through the room. The layers of family secrets were beginning to peel away, revealing the richness of our history, the depth of our connections. As we continued to talk, my grandmother shared stories about Maria, the mischief they caused as children, the dreams they had, and the bond they shared. Each tale painted a vivid picture of a sister who was not just a name, but a person who had shaped my grandmother's life in profound ways. That night, I promised my grandmother that I would keep Maria's memory alive. We began to discuss ways to incorporate her into our family's story, perhaps by creating a family scrapbook that honored the women who came before us. In the weeks that followed, I dove deeper into my family's history. I spent hours researching, collecting stories from relatives, and even tracing the footsteps of my great-aunt Maria. Each discovery brought me closer to understanding not just who she was, but how her life intertwined with mine. As Thanksgiving approached, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I proposed a family gathering where we could share stories of our ancestors and honor those we had lost. My family was excited about the idea, and I could see how it brought my grandmother joy. On the day of the gathering, I set up a makeshift memory wall, adorned with photographs of our family through the years, including the new ones I had printed of Maria. I included her story, highlighting her love, loss, and the impact she had on our family. As we gathered around the table, I could see my grandmother's face light up as we shared memories of those who had passed. When it was her turn, she spoke about Maria with such tenderness, sharing the joy and sorrow of their shared history. It was a moment of healing, not just for her but for all of us. Through my grandmother's stories, I learned that family is more than just bloodlines and shared experiences, it's about the love we carry forward and the memories we honor. Maria's story, once a secret, became a vital thread in the tapestry of our family history. In the end, I realized that uncovering secrets isn't just about exposing the past, it's about creating connections and understanding the complexities of the people we love. As I sat surrounded by my family, I felt grateful for the journey that had led me here, a journey marked by pain, love, and ultimately, a deeper appreciation for the ties that bind us. In the years to come, Maria's legacy would live on, not as a ghost haunting my grandmother, but as a cherished memory that reminded us all of the resilience of love and the importance of family. And I knew that no matter what secrets lay hidden in the past, they could always lead us to a brighter future. Finding an old box in the attic exposed the hidden truth of my family's past. The scent of dust and nostalgia enveloped me as I climbed the creaky stairs to the attic of my childhood home. It had been years since I last ventured up there, and my mother's request to help clean out the space felt like a chance to reconnect with my past. Little did I know, I was about to unearth secrets that would change everything. As I pushed open the attic door, a wave of memories hit me. Old toys, forgotten school projects, and boxes filled with family photos lay scattered about. I grabbed a flashlight, the beam cutting through the dim light as I navigated through the clutter. The attic was like a time capsule, a frozen moment of my childhood. I remembered playing here as a kid, lost in my imagination, but now it felt like a crypt. I started sorting through the boxes, reminiscing over items I hadn't thought about in years. After a few minutes, I stumbled upon an unmarked cardboard box tucked away in the corner, partially hidden beneath a stack of old blankets. Intrigued, I pulled it out and opened the lid. Inside, I found a collection of journals, some neatly stacked, others haphazardly thrown together. The first journal I picked up was dated from the early 1990s and had my mother's name written in elegant cursive on the front. My heart raced. Was this a glimpse into her life before I was born? I flipped through the pages, and what I found sent chills down my spine. My mother had written about her dreams, her struggles, and her fears. But as I continued to read, the tone shifted. She began to detail a relationship with a man named Tom. The words flowed with a mix of passion and pain, and I felt like I was intruding on a deeply personal narrative. In one entry, she wrote about a romantic trip they took to the beach, how they had shared secrets under the stars, and how she thought he might be the one. But then, abruptly, the entries turned darker. There were hints of a breakup, arguments, and ultimately a sense of loss. My stomach churned as I read her words. This was a side of my mother I had never known. As I delved deeper, I found entries discussing an unexpected pregnancy. My heart sank. She described the confusion, the fear, and ultimately, the decision to have an abortion. I felt a mix of emotions, sadness for the struggles she faced, anger that I had never been told about this part of her life, and a deep sense of betrayal. How could she have kept such a significant part of her past from me? Just then, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Panic surged through me, and I quickly shoved the journal back into the box, closing it as my mother appeared in the doorway. "Emily. What are you doing up here?" she asked, trying to peer around me. "I was just cleaning," I stammered, forcing a smile. "Found some old stuff." She eyed me curiously but didn't press further. "Well, don't get too lost in it. We still have a lot to do." I nodded, but my mind was racing. I needed to talk to her, to confront her about what I had read. The revelations felt like a weight pressing down on my chest, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled onto something monumental. After we finished cleaning, I excused myself to my room, heart pounding. How could I approach her? What would I even say? The journal had opened a Pandora's box of emotions, and I knew I needed to confront her sooner rather than later. The next evening, I sat at the kitchen table, picking at my food while my mother cleaned up after dinner. "Mom, can we talk?" I finally blurted out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Of course, sweetie. What's on your mind?" she replied, a hint of concern crossing her face. I hesitated, trying to find the right words. "I found some old journals in the attic." "Yours?" I watched her expression shift from concern to shock. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tightening. "I read some of it," I admitted, feeling exposed and vulnerable. "About Tom and everything." Her face paled. "Emily, Why didn't you ever tell me?" I interrupted, my emotions boiling over. "You kept this whole part of your life from me." "Why?" Tears welled in her eyes, and she sat down across from me, visibly shaken. "I never wanted you to know about my past. It was complicated, and I thought it was behind me. I didn't want you to judge me." "Judge you?" "Mom, this is part of who you are. You had this entire life before me, and I didn't even know." I felt a mix of anger and hurt coursing through me. "Emily, please," she said softly. "It was a different time. I was young and scared. When I met your father, I wanted to start fresh. I thought I could leave that part behind. Did Dad know? I asked, the question hanging in the air like a heavy fog. No, she said, shaking her head. I never told him. I didn't want him to think differently of me. So, you just decided to keep it all hidden? I shot back, frustration rising in my voice. What else are you hiding? What else don't I know? Nothing. I swear, she replied, her voice breaking. I thought it was best for our family to leave the past in the past. As we sat in silence, the weight of unspoken truths lingered in the air. I felt a mixture of sadness and empathy for her, but it didn't erase my sense of betrayal. I needed space to process everything. I spent the next few days lost in thought, grappling with the revelations. My mother had made choices that haunted her, but those choices had also shaped who I was. I couldn't ignore the fact that her past was now a part of my present. On the weekend, I decided to confront my father. It was time to see if he knew anything about this hidden chapter of our lives. I found him in the garage, tinkering with his old motorcycle. He looked up as I approached, wiping his hands on a rag. Hey, Em. What's up? He asked, a smile breaking across his face. Can we talk? I said, my heart racing. Sure. What's going on? He leaned against the bike, giving me his full attention. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. I found some journals in the attic. Mom wrote about her life before you. About someone named Tom. His expression changed, and I could see the realization dawn on him. Oh. I see. Did you know? I pressed, needing him to be honest with me. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. I knew about Tom. She mentioned him when we first started dating. But it was a long time ago, and I thought she had moved on. Did you ever ask her about it? I trusted her, he replied, his voice steady. She had a complicated past, but she was my wife and the mother of our children. I believed in her. I didn't want to pry. I absorbed his words, feeling a mix of respect and sadness. But now I feel like everything is built on secrets. He nodded slowly. I understand. It's hard to grapple with the past, especially when it involves people we care about. But know this, your mother loves you, and she loves me. Our family is built on those bonds, not just blood or history. His words resonated with me. My parents' love was real, built over decades, and it had sustained us through countless ups and downs. I realized that while my mother's past was significant, it didn't change the love we shared as a family. Over the next few weeks, I slowly began to come to terms with everything. I started to open up to my mother again, allowing her to share more about her past on her terms. We discussed the journals, the mistakes she had made, and how they had shaped her into the woman I knew. Each conversation helped bridge the gap between us, and I saw her not just as my mother but as a person with her own story. I learned that Tom had been an important chapter in her life, but my father had been the love that lasted. It was a powerful realization, and it helped me to appreciate the complexities of relationships. My mother's courage in sharing her past allowed me to understand her better, and in turn, it strengthened our bond. As Thanksgiving approached, I knew I wanted to do something special to acknowledge our family's journey. I proposed we go around the table and share one thing we were grateful for, encouraging everyone to be open. My mother looked surprised but pleased, and my father nodded in agreement. That evening, as we sat together, the air was filled with warmth and love. When it was my turn, I spoke from the heart. I'm grateful for our family and all the love we share, even when it's complicated. I'm thankful that we can talk about our past, no matter how messy it is. My parents exchanged glances, a mix of pride and relief washing over their faces. They both expressed their gratitude for the strength of our family and the love we had for one another. It felt cathartic, as if we were shedding the weight of our secrets and embracing our imperfect journey together. In the months that followed, the attic became a symbol of transformation for me. I began to see it as a space-filled knot. I never expected a routine visit to my childhood home would uncover my family's darkest secret. The moment I stepped into my childhood home, a sense of nostalgia washed over me, mingling with an undercurrent of anxiety. It had been 2 years since I last visited, and while the familiar scent of my mother's cooking wafted through the air, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My parents, once so vibrant, seemed muted, as if they were holding their breaths, waiting for something, or someone. It was a Saturday in late October, just a week before my birthday. My mother had insisted I come home to celebrate, claiming she had a surprise for me. As I walked through the hallway, I noticed family photos lining the walls. There was my sister, Sarah, in her high school graduation gown, my brother, Jake, beaming at his first football game, and countless memories of our vacations and birthdays. Yet, there was a strange gap in the timeline, no recent pictures of us together. Emily. My mom called from the kitchen, pulling me from my thoughts. Come help me with dinner. Sure, Mom. I replied, forcing a smile. As I entered the kitchen, I found her stirring a pot of what smelled like beef stew, the same recipe she had made for years. But today, she seemed distracted, her movements quick and anxious. Where's Dad? I asked, glancing around for him. He's in the living room, watching a game. He'll join us shortly, she said, her voice a little too high-pitched. I raised an eyebrow but decided not to press her. I took a seat at the kitchen table, where we always gathered for meals. The table was set with our usual mismatched dishes, but the atmosphere felt heavy. I glanced at my mom, her eyes darting toward the living room. When my dad finally wandered in, his smile didn't reach his eyes. He nodded at me and gave a brief hug before sinking into a chair at the table. How's everything, Em? He asked, but his voice lacked its usual warmth. Good, just busy with work, I replied, trying to gauge what was bothering him. What about you? Everything okay? Yeah, just the usual, he said, a vague answer that left me unsatisfied. The tension at the table was palpable, as if we were all tiptoeing around an invisible landmine. Dinner was filled with awkward conversation. My parents asked about my job and friends, but every question felt rehearsed, as if they were trying to distract me from something they knew. After dinner, while my mom cleaned up, I decided to take a walk around the house, hoping to shake off the unease. I found myself in the living room, where my dad was flipping through channels, his face drawn. I sat next to him, trying to engage him in conversation. What are you watching? Just a game, he mumbled, eyes glued to the screen. I could feel the distance between us, a chasm that had formed over time but now seemed wider than ever. After a while, I stood up and wandered toward the hallway. A door at the end caught my eye, my parents' bedroom. It had always been off-limits as a child, a place filled with adult mysteries. On impulse, I turned the handle, half expecting to find a treasure trove of old memories. Instead, I found a room that felt almost too pristine, as if it had been staged for a magazine shoot. The bed was perfectly made, the dresser organized, and the air smelled faintly of lavender. As I glanced around, something caught my eye, a small box on the nightstand. It was ornate, with intricate carvings that hinted at age. My heart raced. Should I open it? I hesitated but then gave in to curiosity. I lifted the lid and gasped at what I found, a collection of letters, neatly tied with a ribbon. The first one I picked up was dated over 20 years ago, written in elegant cursive. Dear Emily. I hope you're safe and happy. I miss you every day. I've been thinking about you a lot. I know we had our differences, but I want you to know that I love you. My hands trembled as I read on. The letters were filled with sentiments of love and regret, addressed to someone named Daniel. I was baffled. Who was this person, and why were they writing to my mother? I sifted through more letters, my heart racing with each discovery. They detailed a relationship filled with passion and pain, and it was clear from the tone that they had once shared something significant. But the last letter, dated just a few weeks before I was born, left me shaken. Ellen. I can't believe you're moving on with your life. I can't bear the thought of you with someone else. You're my world, and I'll always love you, no matter what happens. Please don't forget me. I was speechless. What was going on? My mother had never mentioned a Daniel, let alone a relationship that seemed so intense. As the weight of the letter settled in, I knew I had to confront my mother. When I returned to the kitchen, I found her wiping down the counters, her back to me. Mom, can we talk? I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Of course, honey. Is everything okay? She turned to face me, her expression shifting from casual to concerned. I found some letters in your room, I admitted, my heart pounding in my chest. Her face paled. What letters? From someone named Daniel. They seemed important. Who is he? She took a step back, her eyes wide with shock. Emily, Mom, please. I deserve to know the truth. My voice wavered, the weight of my discovery crashing down on me. Sit down, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I obeyed, my mind racing. What was she going to say? Daniel was someone I loved before I met your father, she began, her voice shaky. We were young and foolish, and I thought we had a future together. But things happened. What things? I pressed, unable to contain my urgency. Things that changed everything. I got pregnant, and I was terrified. I didn't know how to tell him, so I broke it off and started dating your father instead. I never told Daniel about the baby. When I finally found the courage to reach out, it was too late, he had moved away, and I couldn't find him. The weight of her confession settled heavily in the room. So, you lied to Dad all these years? I felt a mixture of anger and heartbreak. I never meant to lie, she insisted, tears welling in her eyes. I thought I was protecting you and our family. Daniel's letters were a reminder of a past I wanted to forget. Did Dad ever know? No, he didn't. I kept it from him because I was afraid. I didn't want to lose what we had. Her voice cracked, and I could see the pain etched on her face. The room fell silent as I processed her words. The woman I had always seen as my unwavering support had made choices that had spiraled into this tangled web of secrets. What do I do with this information? I finally asked, feeling lost. You can choose how you want to proceed, she replied, her voice softening. But I want you to understand that your father loves you. He raised you as his own, and nothing will ever change that. As the evening wore on, I felt the distance between us begin to close. I couldn't fully grasp the weight of my mother's past, but I realized I needed to hear my father's side of the story. After a sleepless night filled with questions, I decided to confront my dad the next morning. The sun was just rising, casting a warm glow through the kitchen window. My father was already at the table, a cup of coffee in hand. Dad, can we talk? I said, my voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Sure, Em. What's on your mind? He replied, looking up at me. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation ahead. I found out something about Mom, about her past. About someone named Daniel. His expression shifted, a mixture of concern and recognition flashing across his face. I see, he said quietly, setting down his coffee. She loved him before she met you, didn't she? I pressed, wanting him to confirm what I suspected. Yes, he admitted, his gaze steady. She told me about him early on in our marriage. It was a part of her life that I understood, but I always trusted her. I never thought it would affect us. Did you know she wrote him letters? I asked, watching his reaction closely. I knew she had feelings for him at one time, but I didn't know about the letters. I thought she had moved on, he said, a hint of sadness in his voice. I felt a knot form in my stomach. How do you feel about this? He took a moment, choosing his words carefully. I feel hurt that she didn't tell me sooner. But I also understand that people have pasts. What matters is the life we've built together and the love we share as a family. His response surprised me. Instead of anger, he exhibited an understanding that felt genuine. I want you to know, no matter what, I'm here for you. I love you, and that won't change, he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. In that moment, I felt a wave of relief. Despite the upheaval of the truth, the bond between us remained strong. I realized that my father's love wasn't tied to biology, it was rooted in years of shared experiences, laughter, and support. As the day unfolded, I found myself reflecting on the complexities of family. Secrets, while painful, often shaped us in ways we couldn't foresee. I learned that understanding one another's pasts could bring us closer, even if it felt unsettling at first. After discussing the situation with both my parents, I decided to take some time to process everything. I spent the following weeks reaching out to old friends, sharing my story, and finding solace in their perspectives. In the end, I came to accept my family's history as a part of who we were. The letters from Daniel were a reminder of a chapter that shaped my mother but didn't define her. My parents' love for me, unwavering and steadfast, was what truly mattered. As my birthday approached, I felt a sense of closure. My family had faced a storm of revelations, but we emerged stronger. The love that bound us together was resilient, capable of withstanding the winds of the past. On the day of my birthday, I returned home for a small celebration. The atmosphere was lighter, filled with laughter and love. My parents surprised me with a cake, and as we sang, "Happy Birthday," I looked around at the faces of my family, flawed, complex, and beautifully human. In that moment, I realized that family is not just about the blood that connects us, but about the love and understanding we choose to cultivate. Secrets may shake the foundations of our lives, but they also provide an opportunity for growth, healing, and ultimately, connection. I found a letter that shattered my childhood memories and exposed our family's darkest secret. Growing up, my family was always the picture of normalcy. Sunday dinners filled with laughter, summer vacations at the beach, and traditions that defined our holidays. But everything changed the day I discovered that carefully crafted facade was built on a crumbling foundation of secrets. It was a rainy Saturday afternoon in early March, the kind of day that makes you want to curl up with a good book. I was rummaging through the attic, a task my mother had assigned me in a fit of spring cleaning zeal. Dust motes floated in the air as I pushed aside boxes filled with forgotten treasures, old toys, wedding photos, and the remnants of my parents' college days. That's when I stumbled upon an unmarked envelope tucked under an old blanket. Curiosity piqued, I pulled it out and noticed it was yellowed and fragile. My name was scrawled on the front in my mother's familiar handwriting. I hesitated, knowing I was crossing a line, but something compelled me to open it. I pulled out the letter and began to read, my heart pounding in my chest. Dear Emily. If you're reading this, then I've decided it's time for you to know the truth. There are things in our family history that we've kept hidden for your protection, but you deserve to know who we really are. Your father is not who you think he is. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive us when the time comes. Love, Mom. My breath caught in my throat. What did that mean? My father was my rock, my unwavering support. I couldn't fathom the idea that he was anything but the loving dad I'd always known. I flipped the letter over, hoping for more context, but it was blank. Panic surged through me as I realized the enormity of what I had just uncovered. I felt like I was holding a bomb that could detonate at any moment. I needed answers, but where to start? I glanced around the attic, feeling like a trespasser in my own home. I could hear the rain tapping against the window, and I knew my parents were downstairs, blissfully unaware of the turmoil brewing within me. Instead of confronting them right away, I decided to dig deeper. Over the next few days, I began my own investigation. I rummaged through family photo albums and old documents, trying to piece together my mother's cryptic message. I found birth certificates, marriage licenses, and faded photographs, but nothing that shed light on my father's alleged secret. Each passing hour intensified my anxiety and curiosity. I couldn't focus on school, and the once pleasant atmosphere of my home felt suffocating. One evening, while my parents were out for a dinner party, I decided to search their bedroom. It felt wrong, but desperation drove me. I cautiously opened drawers, searching for anything that could explain the letter. In the back of my mother's nightstand, I found a small, locked box. My heart raced, it seemed like a treasure chest of secrets. I felt a mixture of guilt and excitement as I tried to find a way to open it. Just as I was about to give up, I noticed a small key hanging on a chain behind the nightstand. It felt like fate. I grabbed it and slid it into the lock, my hands trembling. With a soft click, the box opened, revealing a collection of letters and photographs. The first thing I noticed was a stack of letters, each one addressed to my mother from someone named Daniel. As I began to read through them, I realized they were love letters. My heart raced as I flipped through the pages, absorbing the words of a man I didn't know. Each letter expressed longing, affection, and deep regret. I felt like I was intruding on a private moment that belonged to a version of my mother I'd never seen. Then I stumbled upon a photograph tucked between two letters. It was a picture of a young man, his features strikingly familiar, standing with my mother at what looked like a college party. They were beaming, carefree, arms wrapped around each other. I flipped it over and read the inscription, Daniel and Ellen, 1995. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This Daniel was the man my mother had once loved before marrying my father. But then another thought crossed my mind, was he really just a past love? The letter hinted at something darker. After I had exhausted the contents of the box, I realized I needed to confront my mother. I decided to approach her the next evening, after dinner, when the mood was light. As we sat together, I felt my heart racing. Mom, can we talk? I said, my voice shaking slightly. Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind? She replied, setting her fork down and looking concerned. I took a deep breath. I found a letter in the attic. It was addressed to me, and it mentioned something about Dad not being who I think he is. Her face paled, and for a moment, I thought she might faint. Emily, Mom, please just tell me the truth. I deserve to know. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Your father, he's not your biological dad. My heart dropped. What? What do you mean? She took a deep breath, tears welling in her eyes. When I was in college, I had a relationship with Daniel. It was passionate and intense, but ultimately it fell apart. A year later, I met your father and married him. I didn't know I was pregnant until after we got married. Pregnant? I echoed, trying to process the whirlwind of information. So, Dad has raised me all these years, thinking I was his daughter. Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. He loves you more than anything, and he deserves to know the truth, but I was so afraid of losing everything. I thought it was better to keep it a secret. The room felt like it was closing in on me. Everything I knew about my family, my identity, was shifting like sand beneath my feet. What happened to Daniel? Why didn't you tell him? He died in a car accident a few years after we broke up. I thought it would be easier to bury the past, but now I realize I was wrong. The weight of her confession hung in the air like a heavy fog. I was reeling, grappling with a truth that felt both freeing and devastating. What do I do now? I asked, feeling lost. My mother reached out, her hands trembling as she took mine. You don't have to decide anything right away. Your dad loves you unconditionally, and he has always been there for you. You're still his daughter, no matter what. In the days that followed, I struggled to come to terms with my new reality. My father, the man I had looked up to and adored, was not my biological parent, but that didn't change the love we shared. I felt torn between my loyalty to him and the urge to confront the truth. I decided to talk to my father, but I needed time to prepare myself. The next weekend, after much deliberation, I finally found the courage to sit down with him. Dad, I began, my voice quivering, I need to talk to you about something important. He looked at me with his usual warmth, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. What is it, Emily? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I found some letters and learned about my biological father, Daniel. His expression hardened slightly, and I could see the gears turning in his mind. What did your mother tell you? She said you're not my biological father. That Daniel is. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the revelation settling heavily between us. I had a feeling this day would come. Ellen should have told you sooner. Why didn't you? I asked, feeling the sting of betrayal. Because I wanted to protect you. You're my daughter, no matter what. I've raised you, loved you, and supported you. That will never change. His words struck a chord within me. I realized that despite the initial shock, the bond we shared was still intact. But I need to understand who I am. I don't want to live a lie. He nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. I respect that, Emily. But remember, family isn't just about blood. It's about love, support, and the memories we create together. As we sat in silence, I felt a sense of clarity washing over me. My identity was still mine, shaped by the love and experiences I had shared with him. The truth about my biological father was just a piece of a much larger puzzle. In the weeks that followed, I worked to rebuild my understanding of my family. I learned more about Daniel from my mother, piecing together stories and memories. I discovered that he had been a talented artist, passionate about life and love. Although he was gone, his presence lingered in the letters and photographs my mother had cherished. Through it all, my relationship with my father deepened. We spoke openly about my feelings, and he reassured me of his unwavering love. The revelation had changed us, but it had also drawn us closer together. In the end, I realized that family secrets, while unsettling, often come with the potential for healing and understanding. The truth might have shaken my foundations, but it also allowed me to redefine what family truly meant, an unbreakable bond rooted in love, resilience, and the willingness to embrace our past.